Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Impactnomic. My name is Desmond Situma, and as always, welcome to this platform. Today we are discussing Kenya. A lot of things happening in this country, a lot of global news about Kenya in terms of climate, in terms of a thriving economy. But what do Kenyans themselves think about the things we see on the news? So today we are joined by Mr. Jeremy Kaburu, a very passionate young person from Kenya. And also on my right, we have Erastus Ooko, also a young Kenyan who is doing amazing things in this country and all over the world. So we are going to have a conversation around climate action, a bit on the economy of Kenya, as well as how the Africa-Europe relations play in the context of Kenya and East Africa. So welcome, Erastus. Please tell us a bit about yourself and the work you're doing at the moment.
Thank you, Desmond. A pleasure to be in this particular podcast. I think this is my first podcast, so yeah, it's a pleasure. As he has mentioned, I am in the environmental space. I'm an environmental advocacy champion, and also I work around movement building in the climate space and championing solutions that are green and sustainable.
Wow, that is great. And I can tell our viewers that Wayne has a lot of things to inform us. On my left, we have Jeremy. Jeremy, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you, Desmond, for having me and providing this space so that we share the information, the little information we have to the public. So my name is Jeremy Munene Kaburu. I'm an environmental educator, let me put it that way, just disseminating the little knowledge I have to the public, and also a researcher focusing on environmental education, climate action, and biodiversity conservation. Thank you.
Okay, that is great. And both of you have very different experiences, some similar, of course. I would like to start with you, Jeremy, because as I understand, you are working a lot with the private sector in terms of research around climate action, in terms of public engagement and community engagement. What would you say is the biggest thing that the private sector can play in terms of climate action? Because most of the time we see this space dominated by governments, by the, let's say, CSOs, what is the meaning of CSOs?
Community.
The civil society.
Yes, exactly. Civil society organizations. But sometimes we tend not to put a lot of emphasis on private sector when they are actually the ones driving the economy more. So what role are they kind of playing in terms of driving climate action in Africa?
Okay, just to respond to that, I'll put it in two words. It's innovation and implementation. I was working with the universities, the higher educations. We were dealing with the research, but we are not going into the innovation bit of it. So the private sector, they have the resources. Why can they now come up with these innovations? For example, when we talk of solid waste management, the research is there, the recommendations are there on how we can manage our waste. Now it's up to the private sector to come up with these innovative ideas of how we reduce our waste, give us alternatives of plastic, things like that. So they actualize the research that is already there through innovation. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Innovation and
implementation.
Yeah. Well, that's the best way to put it. Now, let me come to you, Wayne, because I understand that for a couple of years we've been working with civil society organizations, engaging with community. Do you see a serious engagement between civil society and the private sector? And in this case, I mean like businesses and non-profit organizations in terms of responding or adapting to climate change?
Yeah, definitely, Desmond. I would say, as Jeremy has mentioned, is the private sector provide the information and the data that is required, and then the civil society, we are more champion, or within the space that I've worked, we are always on the advocacy side. So we are telling the government this is the way that you need to go. because the data is actually supporting that and the research is actually showing that. So we're telling the government this is what you need to implement. But as we know, the government is always sluggish when it comes to implementation and also just enforcing. Once they have implemented, we usually say that we are very good on paper, we have the best policies, but now when it comes to enforcing and implementing those particular policies is where now we get the challenge.
Okay.
But there's always an interchange of information and free flow of information between the private sector and the civil societies. And it's a mutual relationship that is always building up, and the government should actually take advantage of that and utilize this particular relationship.
Okay, I kind of agree with you on that because, like you have said, the private sector is driving innovation
And implementation.
implementation. But the way Wayne is putting it is the element of implementation is very, very slow with the government.
Yeah, it's actually it's a challenge. It's a problem that we have a very intricate legal framework, very good policies, but from the government side, we have seen the challenge of non-implementation of these policies. But there are people in the private sector, the SMEs. For example, when we talk the issues of circularity, you go into the informal settlement, you will find this community-based organization, they're already doing something. But the government itself, it's not really supporting or taking the front seat in driving the policy implementation. So what they are doing actually is coming up with more policies, and we already have existing policies that guide on how we should address some of the environmental challenges we have. Yeah, so there's the lack of government involvement in this. But when you look closely at the private sector, at the CSOs, look at the communities, they are already doing some of these bits on issues of circularity, issues of biodiversity conservation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just on the same note, because you've mentioned about research, which is one of the things you do, and Wayne here has said that there's a lot of research and data available, and both of you have said government is a bit lagging behind in terms of course, they are doing some things, but at very slower pace than they should be. How do we get out of this situation to make sure that we really speed up the implementation of the policies that we already have?
Okay, that's a very good question. What I've noted in my last couple of years experience working in the universities is that many people in the climate action space or environmental conservation, they work in silos. You don't want to know what the other person is doing. So the best way to move forward is to align our practices to the magical SDG. And you know that is the partnership and collaboration. We have to be...
That's SDG number 17, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have to open your space to others. Let the CSOs work with the government. Let the CSOs work with the private sector so that we can share that knowledge and resources. Some people are more knowledgeable, others have the resources that are needed to come up with this innovative. So it's the simple act of collaboration and partnership.
Okay,
Yeah.
Interesting. And Wayne, what do you think? How do we get out of this situation where we have very nice, very well-planned policies, but unfortunately the implementation is quite slow?
Yeah, from my end, my interaction and what I've seen is that most of these innovations that are coming up, they're still in their early stages of development. They're still in the incubation stages. And with these ideas, getting the funding to actually scale them up is usually a problem. And then you find some of the problems that we have, or the already established infrastructure that maybe is the problem. They're already well established and they have the financial muscle and they have the goodwill, also the government. So it goes back to the government goodwill. How much is the government willing to actually support these innovations, to actually come up, if it's to give them breaks on taxes or to give them incentives? How are they supporting them? You cannot have a business or an innovation that is starting and you have very strict taxes put in place. They have not even started breaking even from whatever funding they have gotten into it, but you've already started taxing them very heavily, not in the same way that they can compete with this already established infrastructure. So it goes back to the government. Are they willing to actually support this innovation? How are they accepting them? How are they nurturing them? Giving them an environment that is suitable, that is conducive for them to actually grow and be able to expand. So giving them that leeway, and also kind of drawing back this already established infrastructure. If they are already causing harm to the environment, if we have the data and the science that is speaking that this is actually the problem, how are we divesting, or how are we scaling down on it so that we can be able to pick up on something that is more suitable to the environment?
Interesting, especially when you talk about yes.
Just to add on what Wayne has said, very good points. But there's also the issue of political goodwill. In this case, is the behavior of our political class. I was reading somewhere we needed to shift landfill to a more sustainable way of managing our waste. But you find out that the people in that community, they are the waste pickers. They go and collect the scrap metals, the plastic for recycling. So they told one of the political leader in that area that if this landfill was to shift, then our livelihood is disrupted. So that guy, the politician, went ahead and said, we cannot come with more sustainable ways of managing waste because my voters will be affected. So if we can change the behavior of our politician to be more supportive of already existing policies that advocate the way we should interact with nature, then it will be a very nice world to live in.
Yeah.
And how would we do that to change
Well,
how can we, because we are the ones who elect these leaders, right?
Yeah.
And let's say this community, or quite many communities do that actually. There's a problem, but perhaps as few people benefit from that problem. So it's kind of the status quo is maintained for these few people to keep reaping from that problem.
Yeah.
But if the politician is supporting that, how do we change that perception and also act on that?
Yeah, probably maybe if I can just dive into that. Sure. It's always in like when we are championing for environmental conservation, or you're championing for more sustainable ways of how we can be able to balance economy and the environment, or development with the environment. It's always seen that you are anti-development, like you don't want to develop. And that has always been a question of how now do you balance this out? For instance, his case that he is putting forward is that a community is benefiting from this, and it's the community that is telling the politician that if this is taken away from us, our livelihood is going to be disrupted. So in that case, how do you now transition? And that is where you have the just transition. How do you move away from this particular kind of model that you're now operating in and transition to something better? But in the long run, you don't get to disrupt this particular community or the livelihood that they have always enjoyed and have always been using to provide for their families. So if you're having a new technology that is coming in, how is this community going to benefit from that technology? So that you don't completely cut them off and just say that this is bad, now we're stopping this, we are going to start this somewhere else, and that's the end of it. So there's always that balance that you need to have, and you always need to consider once you're bringing in this new innovative ideas, how are you going to transition this community? If it's a country benefiting from oil, let's say, for instance, or that landfill, how is this new innovation going to benefit them so that they don't cling to that particular technology or model that they were using so that they can also be more positive to actually transition and embrace this new technology or innovation that is coming.
Very, very interesting point on just transition. Jeremy, do you want to add on
I
that?
want to add something. In my years of experience as an environmentalist, I've come to notice that environmental conservation, just translation, ties well with education. The two goes together. So if you are bringing a new technology or you're bringing a project that will disrupt the livelihoods or the normal setting in a community, first you must disseminate information to them, disseminate the data, engage with them, tell them your ways of living are harmful to the environment. We need to shift to them. Why? Provide them with the data, educate them, have that engagement so that they also have their side of the story. They have the indigenous knowledge that people tend to not recognize, but we must uphold it. So if you tie just translation to education, community engagement, then we tend to reduce the challenge of ignorance that is really rampant in our community.
Yeah, you've both mentioned just transition severally. How would you explain what just transition is to a person who may not be familiar with it?
Just transition, in my layman way of explaining it, is a way that you can be able to get from one model of livelihood to another one without having impacts that are going to actually affect your livelihood, your social interaction, definitely also the environment. So it's a way to move you into a new model, but not interrupting with your social and economical way of living.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Now, let me bring you back a bit because you were giving some examples of, for example, he mentioned a landfill or a dump site somewhere that the community were picking some items from. Then, when you are listing a few things, you mentioned oil, for example. And I understand that oil is quite contentious at the moment when it comes to Africa and Europe or the Americas and so on and so forth. So when we look at the data, so many Africans in the dark in terms of access to power. So some people call this energy poverty and many other names. Then when we call for green transition, for example, moving from fossil fuel exactly towards greens, solar, wind, geothermal, and so on and so forth. Do you see this happening in the near future for the case of Africa, considering that we have a very huge population that don't have access to power?
Yeah, it's it's always a mind-boggling kind of. It sounds like some science or mathematics that is very complicated, but it's actually not.
Okay.
Africa has largest potential for renewable energies, but then comes in the gap of finance and technology. That is now where the problem comes in. And from the last COP, COP28, if you're following it, they were coming up with a declaration or the conclusion that we are at the beginning of the end. So we are now radically going to shift from fossil fuel going to renewable energy. And there's always this promise of the rich countries or the countries that have actually developed from these fossil fuels to contribute more towards this just transition. And the sad part is that these suggestions are just made as suggestions. They are not legally binding. If they are to be legally binding, we would say that we need this particular amount of money for the developing countries to be able to transition to get into the renewable energies, but that is not happening. So we see a deadlock where we have countries that are actually willing and wishing to transition, but they don't have access to the finance because these technologies are new to us and they are also expensive. So we need that particular support to be able to do that transition. So they need to give us the technology and also support us in terms of finance so that we can be able to actually just transition. And that is where you look at countries which have these resources, the fossil fuel resources. They are always very hesitant to actually be associated with this kind of talk. And that is now where the problem of just transition comes in, because somebody is coming to actually cut your livelihood and tell you to move into something that you don't have. So how can the West or the global North support this particular just transition if they are really serious about it? How do they support financially and in terms of technology?
Jeremy, can you answer that? How?
Ooh, that's a tough discussion, but I'll try to dive into it. Well, to have for you to change your behavior, let me put it that way, you have to begin somewhere.
Yes.
We cannot just say that within the next 3 years we just transition into renewables. That's not possible. Why can't we at least make strides to move to the renewables? Yes, we are using the fossil fuels. The challenge is the funding. Do we really have to rely to the West to give us funds? We as the global South, we are already using the fossil fuels, right? So it's up to us regionally or nationally. What are some of these small practices that we can start to engage for us to transition to that? We have seen now they have set up the largest solar farm in sub-Saharan Africa, here in Lake Turkana. These are some of the projects that as a country, as the East Africa regional bloc, as COMESA or SADC, they can try to have we internally as the African continent, so that even when we go to these international forums, the COP, where the ends of state are meeting, they can say, we as African, we have already begun this. Why can't you now fund us more to come up with more projects? So it's a tough question. Yes, we can't really say that we don't depend on fossil fuel, but we have to make those strides to move away from that. So we have to change the mindset. It's about the mindset of our leaders too. Not when they go to this deliberation, they put it as it's the problem of the West. No, it's also our problem, because I believe as the government, we have some resources that we can set up. Even it trickles down now to the institution themselves. We have higher education institution. They are big, they are like mini cities within themselves. What are some of the projects that they can do? Are they generating biogas from there? Are they setting up solar panel? We have seen some universities here in Kenya, they have like an internal transition to renewable, setting for solar farms. So those are some of the projects that we as a country can do. And then before presenting the case to the global North.
Yeah, indeed, I agree with you. And coming back to institutions of higher learning, I think we've had so many academic publications, a lot of research. And like you mentioned, innovation and implementation. And then Wayne mentioned the issue of funding. Because we have the data, but there's no money to work on it, if I'm getting you correctly. And it seems if we keep relying on the West, it's not going to work.
Actually, before we even proceed, the money is there. It's the commitment. The money is there. If we were to be honest and take the...
when you say the money is there, you mean within Africa or from the other side?
Any side. The money is there.
Okay.
It's a conversation I've had with various people. The money is there. The issue is the commitment. Yeah. For example, we have just ended a pandemic. Within 4 years, almost everybody seems to have forgotten we have a pandemic. What if we channel the same financial resources to the climate crisis?
But during the pandemic, I remember there was something called vaccine appetite. Okay? So like vaccines are ours.
Yeah.
Okay. In my opinion, I see the same situation with climate finance, because it seems everybody is pulling towards themselves. Like, this is my money, you deal with the problems. The only challenge here is that this problem is, mostly caused by, developed countries. So it is their responsibility as well. But like you put it, we as Africans, or the people of the South, we have to kind of find our own ways of financing our adaptation or mitigation measures to climate. I don't know how that is going to go.
We don't have to invest in very large scale projects. Yeah, we can. It's just the small project. For example, now you look at the Lake Turkana wind power project.
And that's in Kenya.
It's
Yeah.
in Kenya.
Yes.
It's the largest in sub-Saharan Africa. If they were to tap the energy, it can power 1 or 2 counties. Okay, they come up with another project targeting, for example, the northern frontier. Okay, perhaps on to disrupt or strengthen the resilience of the livestock system or the agriculture there to climate change. So we begin somewhere. Yeah, what are we doing internally before going to ask for? Because we have been asking for the loss and damages funds for how long now? The commitments are there, but no one is fulfilling them.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we have the right to ask because they are the largest emitters. Okay.
Yes.
But also for us as Africans, as Kenya, we have to be doing something. Yes.
Okay,
And
but
another
one interesting thing I know about Kenya is that most of our energy is actually green energy, because I think more than 80% of Kenyan power is green. Perhaps from hydro, from solar, like you say in Turkana, and geothermal, which is also the biggest contributor to the power grid in Kenya. So I think Africa can show, like looking at Kenya's example, and also looking at the couple of years Kenya has been leading in terms of climate action, it is possible that Africa can lead the way to respond to climate change.
absolutely. Yeah. So one of the challenge that I've come across is that people from the developed nations say that for us we exploited the fossil fuel to become developed. So why can't you Africa invest in fossil fuel, then you develop and then take care of the environment later, which is a very bad approach of development. Okay, so this changing also the mindset of the influential people from the global north, it's a challenge. Okay, that's why you see in most conference of parties, when a person from the global south is speaking, the room is almost half
empty.
But when someone from the global north are talking, it's full. So it's about they have to accept that things have changed. We are in very troubling times. We have to balance between environmental conservation and development.
And I'm just thinking, instead of us like waiting for this loss and damage, the technology and the funding,
Yes.
how conducive is also the environment here open to investment? Investors who are coming up, because if a serious investor who has already seen the trend, the change that is coming, they want to invest on something that is coming, something that is new, something that is actually sustainable and great. So how is the environment actually conducive for them to be able to come to invest? That one now is in the part of government, because the government is quite focusing on this particular money. And as we know, our African governments, once they get that money, we are not so sure how that money is actually getting spent. Is it really going to serve the purpose that it was intended for? And just a small example, flashback example, when we talk about institutions, starting the change from the institutions, we were both in the same university. And when I was doing my research paper before we finished school. I was doing on how we can be able to actually tap into this, let's say, water harvesting and also sustainable way of energy production within institutions so that they can be energy secure and water secure. And while I was going through that process, I had a professor who was advising me, and he told me, like, this is a no-go area. You should not touch, because we have people who are actually benefiting from this particular infrastructure that is set up in place. So how willing are our government, the environment, is it willing to actually have that transition, have investors come in? And are they also like encouraging? So let's say like these private sectors, are they encouraging them to transition? Because if an institution as big as where we came from was to say that we are welcoming investors who can be able to help us divest in terms of our energy access, I'm sure there will be a number lined up coming to actually do that. So is there that willing kind of atmosphere welcoming these investors?
So what you are saying is the investment climate in Kenya and kind of in quite many other African countries is questionable.
Yeah.
So
and you will find that there's taxes and taxes are mounted on them, and people are like, this is not the right place to invest.
So if I get you right, this could be one of the reasons why there is not a lot of serious fundraising or investors coming to invest in these green technologies, for example.
That could be one of the reasons. I'm just assuming, like, looking at it.
Of course, there are many reasons.
You can look at the energy sector in Kenya. It's monopolized. If we were to say that we have another, it's not monopolized. We have people coming in, setting up energy infrastructure with favorable prices, because right now we don't have an option. It's either Kenya Power or no power. So if there were other options for us,
if it was a competitive
space, it was a competitive environment, I think we would have much more investment and also people coming to invest and divesting from this traditional kind of
I had the same comment. I had the same comments from a friend in South Africa, because they are also facing a lot of issues with their energy supply.
It's terrible.
And there is a lot of capture of these institutions to an extent that sometimes even the leadership of the government doesn't know what to do. So what do we do if the government itself is complaining that?
I think it's just an illusion. The government always knows what is happening.
Because my observation is that many of these companies, there's a lot of influence from people in government. And it becomes quite tricky when the same people who are passing policy, sometimes good policy by the way, then they go back and stifle the implementation of the same policy they pass. And sometimes they pass very punitive policies so that they keep reaping from these parastatals or institutions. But let me go back to fundraising, because this also you mention it as an issue, but more specifically to entrepreneurship in Kenya. Do you see any way possible that many young Kenyans, especially those who are unemployed, or those who want to transition into entrepreneurship, what would you tell them to do if they want to find ways of responsible fundraising?
Definitely looking at the trend where we are going, everything has to be green, has to be sustainable. So looking at that particular part, find a solution that aligns with that. Start fundraising on it, or even before you get now to the outside market, looking for grants, looking for serious funders, look for funding around you. Is it you're going to borrow from a bank, borrow from friends? Start something so that it's actionable and there is data to support that. It's not just an idea that you're coming up with. Actualize it so that when you're presenting it to someone, they can actually see that this is something that is already working. The only problem you're having is scaling it up.
Yeah.
So using the data that you already have, somebody can now have the confidence to actually invest and say that if this is the data that you have on the scale that you're operating in, if we scale it up, this is what we're going to get out of this. And I'm definitely sure there will be investors who are interested in that, looking at something that has been tested and proven that it actually works, and something that has a promising future when it comes to its growth, and also in terms of alignment in sustainability and great.
But how about if I have a crazy idea that I haven't seen around, and I really believe it's gonna work, and I don't have any money to do it on my own?
I don't think investors, unless it's a very trusting investor, will delve into that. They usually want to see something that has worked.
So if you have an idea, you have first to start working on it.
Yeah, put it in a small do a small scale demonstration of it, or kind of
like a pilot project.
Yeah, pilot project of it.
Because my experience is I see many young people with big
Great
business
idea.
ideas, but they don't act on them in the name of I don't have money.
You'll always never have money, because it's grand. You want to start at the national level, and you haven't proven that this thing can actually work. How is somebody going to invest millions or billions, not knowing what it is going to be tomorrow? So if you have the data that actually supports it, then somebody can see the logic behind it and be able to support it.
And Jeremy, actually, you work with the private sector, and you mentioned innovation. What do you see in terms of the investment climate or the reforms that are happening in that space to support emerging entrepreneurs, especially those that are creating sustainability solutions as businesses? Do you see a lot of, for example, investment coming in?
Yeah, absolutely. If, for example, you have a unique idea, unique project that stands out, don't buy too much. Just provide something that is likely to disrupt the business model. Then investors are willing to come on board. For example, something small. We've talked of solid waste. So there was an instance where these people, the farmers, they generate a lot of organic waste. So they came up with the idea of, let us generate biogas from this, and then use this, not just use the biogas to power our equipment, but power a cold storage facility. You see?
Okay.
Yeah. So you are addressing the issue of reducing the post-harvest losses that most farmers face. They reduce their income. So when you present such a case to the investor, they are already willing to come on board, because for first you are addressing the emissions, you are building resilience of the food system in that community. So it's just framing your idea to become a unique.
I have a big question for you guys, because you both have experience in sustainability. You are both young people, very energetic, budding entrepreneurs. If someone asked you, is investing in sustainability profitable, what would you tell them?
It's very profitable, because the sustainable way always has measures on how to cut losses. Just what he has said. If you're having a cold storage for your produce, that means you've cut the post-harvest loss. Yeah. So sustainable ventures, they are always sustainable because they're, in a way, they'll definitely find ways on how to cut on some elements that are actually eating most of the investment. So that makes you have maximum profitability, because you've cut out the loss that you would have incurred along the way. So depending on how you're looking at it, if you have a really sustainable model and how you have crafted it, definitely it's profitable.
Okay, but I've had concerns of people saying that sustainability is too expensive.
I have one issue with sustainability. It's a good idea. My only problem is the the product they are presenting to the market. The green products, let me put that way, they are very expensive. For example, consider an e-bike.
Yeah.
The price for an e-bike to a normal one that is powered by the fossil fuel, people are likely to go to the normal one because the e-bike is quite expensive. So it's not a big challenge. It's only for the innovators to try and set the pricing to be more affordable to the people. Okay, so that when we go to the market, you feel that yes, I'm promoting the pathway to sustainability, but there is also the value for money, not too
Jeremy,
expensive.
what you mean is,
They should reduce the price.
Yeah.
but in this case, you are justifying my point that sustainability in some ways is
Yeah,
expensive.
that's why I didn't. At first, I didn't present my case when was
That's-
saying.
That's where we're going back. We're going back to the government actually looking at this. It's not just about big talk when you are at conferences. It's things that you are implementing right here on the ground. If you're saying you want to move away from fossil fuel, why don't you start phasing out that fossil fuel and start embracing this green technology? If you're saying it's for e-bike, why don't you give? Because if I am an investor, if I'm coming up with a solution, I have to have profits. I need to reap profits. And if my production from the inception to the time it's getting to the end consumer, I'm incurring all these costs in terms of taxes, in terms of hiked prices, maybe say for acquiring cells to store this particular energy. Those small things, I'm going to pass down the cost to you. So unless the government actually cushions me from all this,
It's the
government-
enabling environment.
yeah, they need to give you an enabling environment. That's why people say they usually say that being what is the word I'm looking for? Even just eating green or eating healthy eating habits.
Vegan.
Yeah, being a vegan or eating healthy foods, ecologically produced foods are expensive. That's why you find them in the high-end
It's for
markets.
rich people.
Yeah, it's the same thing. If I'm producing this, I'm not in the competitive market for me to be able to compete with people who are doing industrial farming. So how is the government cushioning that for me? If I'm going through all this hassle to be able to produce for you something that is healthy and safe,
Yeah.
I'm going to pass that cost down to you unless the government gives me a favorable market for me to be able to produce something that is safe and healthy. I'm not going to compete with the industrial agriculture.
Yeah.
So it goes back to the government. We have lots of solutions. We're talking about e-bike. We are talking about ways on how we can be able to actually look at waste. When you look at plastics, the instance of plastics, there's so many alternatives to plastics, but their production cost, whatever manufacturing until they get to the end user, they have incurred so much, so they have to pass that cost down to you.
Okay.
So how is the government actually enabling this, giving them incentives, giving them tax breaks, if they can, for them to be able to actually thrive, because they are starting kind of ventures, they're starting businesses, they are starting innovations. How does the government cushion them from this market that has already been dominated by a different infrastructure?
Okay. So thanks a lot, guys, for watching. Oh man, I cannot thank you enough. Really, it's very, very encouraging to see you follow me, watch my content. So keep watching, share this content with other people, and like and subscribe as well, so that together we can build this platform and spread the message of encouragement to other people share the world and good experiences and happiness and joy with others, and also talk about bad things. That's life. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. See you next week. Bye bye. Mwah. Phew. Catch that. Do good and be great. Ciao ciao. Bye. Kwaheri. Asante.